Welcome to the first episode of One on Mets, and today we're going to have a short but honest conversation about the current state of the New York Mets core and what I believe should happen to this core kind of group of guys moving forward. And first, let me just kind of define what I believe, who the core group of guys are. And for me, I think you have obviously Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor. That's no surprise there. And these are the two guys you're not really going to do anything with them. Obviously, they're on those huge deals, deservedly so. You can say that if you can dispute if the money's worth it or not. I think at this point I think most Mets fans and most baseball fans even would say that Lindor's contract at this point is a steal and a bargain. And then Soto, obviously in a vacuum, yes, it's an overpay, but the signing of what he means, this generational first ballot Hall of Famer, choosing the Mets and Mets being able to sign a caliber player like this, who's going to win, in all likelihood, an MVP at some point down the road, if not even this year with the Mets. I think they would need to make the playoffs in order for him to be the MVP, but we can debate that on another day. But these are the guys that I really want to discuss are Pete Alonso and Jeff McNeil and Edwin Diaz. I think those, and obviously we have Brandon Nimmo, and I have seen arguments out there for people saying we should trade Brandon Nimmo, and I want to push back on that just really quickly because, and I do know it's been a little disappointing even since, and I think that's especially just kind of due to his plantar fasciitis that kind of started popping up around last year. And he says he's been dealing with it for a while. And I know the production maybe isn't where Mets fans have kind of been accustomed to seeing Brandon Nimmo's production being, but I think we need to kind of look at this in more of like a 360 bird's eye view and just kind of say, okay, if you were to trade Brandon Nimmo, first of all, he has to consent to any trade, which he will not do in all likelihood, I believe. And second, replacing a 3-win player as a floor. I mean, Brandon Nimmo's floor at this point is a 3-win player, which is a good baseball player. This is an everyday starter, even on teams like the LA Dodgers. But the guys that I really want to talk about are Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, and Edwin Diaz. Because obviously I think they have the most question marks kind of going into next year, just because obviously with Alonso and Diaz, it's more so overtly obvious with their contracts. Diaz does have that opt-out for this year, and in all likelihood, he probably will opt out, and I think a lot of Mets fans will probably want to see him go after that game yesterday, but so anything is possible. And I'm honestly 50-50 if they're going to keep Edwin Diaz. I kind of bounce back and forth on that every single day. I think in all likelihood, if Diaz opts out, I think the Mets will offer him a competitive contract, and I think they should. I don't anticipate them getting into a bidding war with a lot of other teams. I think the Mets at that point would let him walk if Diaz were to opt out, but I do want to see the Mets make a concerted effort to bring him back because he's able to pitch in New York, which I think that's a huge thing, and he was able to rebound. And obviously this year isn't quite 2022, but it's not far off. I do think the Mets should look to try and at least make a competitive offer to keep Edwin Diaz back. And for Pete Alonso, this is a player that I think gets a lot of hatred from the fan base, and just because I think there are just some really frustrating moments with this player, even despite all of the accomplishments that he's had in a Mets uniform and all those records that he is breaking and will continue to break and probably will shatter if he stays here for an extended amount of time beyond this year. And my question, kind of similar to Edwin Diaz, I look at both of them similarly. If you were to not sign Pete Alonso, I guess, and he were to walk, where is that production kind of coming from? Like, where are you replacing a floor of 30 plus home runs a year with well over 100 RBIs? And I know those are counting stats, but this is a 140 WRC plus bat at the worst. It's so quite obvious. I know the Mets were ready to roll this year with Mark Vientos at first base, and I know Mark has turned it on lately, but I'm not sure where that production comes from. Are you really betting on that for next year with Mark Vientos? I like the player, and I really do. I think Vientos can be and will be a very good bat in Major League Baseball. I just don't think taking a gamble with letting Pete Alonso walk and then saying, okay, Mark, here are the keys to first base is a great idea. So I think the Mets really do need to make a concerted effort to bring Alonso back even more than Diaz. And then last but not least, we kind of get into Jeff McNeil here. And Jeff is such a, I think, polarizing figure in Mets land a little bit, just because this is a player that, came in as a rookie. He was older, same year as Pete Alonso in 2019, and this guy could just spray the ball all over the field. And he could play so many different positions. I think, for my money, I think he is at worst a top 3 utility player in Major League Baseball. I think the strides that this guy's made, not even in just center field this year, for crying out loud. This guy's playing a serviceable center field. He can play second base very well, and I'm sure he could even play. He can play all over the diamond. He can play in all corner outfield spots if you really need him to. But in the same light, there were reports that around the trade deadline, the Mets were looking to move Jeff McNeil, which I found a little curious just for this year. Simply because I think where would this team be without him playing center field? I mean, Cedric Mullins has been nothing but nothing short of an unmitigated disaster this year. The bat is putrid, and it's not even Tyrone Taylor level of production, unfortunately. And at least Tyrone Taylor is giving you that elite defense in center field, and Jeff has been able to kind of go into center field most days and play it pretty well. And he's also obviously giving you a well above league average bat with a roughly around like a 125 WRC plus, which a lot of teams would absolutely be clawing for. And kind of working off of that, I think the Mets, I won't say should, but I think they will. And I don't hate the idea of exploring a Jeff McNeil trade this offseason. And it has nothing to do with the guy or the baseball player himself. I think the Mets are trying to kind of or David Stearns and co. are trying to kind of transition this core into the new era of Mets players, and I think that's really starting with like their two top prospects in AAA right now, in Carson, Benge, and Jet Williams. I don't think the Mets are going to touch center field this coming off season. I think they're going to roll with the Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri platoon out there in center field. Tyrone Taylor obviously getting a bulk of those starts, I would assume. And obviously, Jose Siri is essentially a nothing with the bat, but at least those guys are giving you elite defense out there in center field. And I think that the Mets are just going to wait until Carson, Benge, or Jet Williams are ready, and then one of those two guys will be handed over the keys to center field for next year. And I don't hate that idea because you have to find out if these guys are good. It's such a delicate and such a difficult thing to balance, where the Mets are trying to compete and contend for World Series year in and year out with sustainable success, but they also have these guys in their prime years. Obviously, Soto's still young. He's only 26 years old, but you do have Lindor and the guys that I mentioned before. They're all in their early 30s, Lindor being 30, 31, and Alonso the same age. So it is a difficult balancing act. I think that's the route that the Mets will, and that's the route that I think the Mets should take. And as far as the Jeff McNeil trade goes, I think kind of working off what I said with the Jet Williams and Carson Benge call, Jet Williams can play shortstop, but obviously Lindor's there. He can play. His second base is going to be his most natural position. It looks like he can also play out there in center field. You know, he's a 70-grade runner. And I think the Mets are going to be looking, my prediction would be, I think the Mets are going to be looking to move Jeff McNeil and maybe another piece or two for starting pitching. And I don't hate that idea. And it will be tough to see Jeff McNeil go. He's one of my favorite Mets. The guy just shows up every single day and he just plays. And I think this version of Jeff McNeil, where he's maybe more of a 260 hitter, but he's hitting for a bit more power. I think it was an adjustment for him, kind of like when the shift changes came into Major League Baseball. But I think he's handled it really well, and he's bounced back after a really tough year last year. And he also wasn't. I don't think he had his best. I think he would tell you he probably didn't like his year the year before in 2023 either. So I think that's what will happen and probably should happen with this team. Unfortunately, it just seems like Jeff is honestly at this point a bargain of a contract, and he's under team control for another 2 years. After this, I think a lot of teams would be jumping at the bit to get this guy, especially a team maybe that has that's lacking in the offensive department and maybe has a surplus of pitchers. Not many of those teams do exist, but the Miami Marlins do come to mind. As well as the Seattle Mariners. I think the Mets could look at exploring a trade involving George Kirby. I think that's a guy that the Mariners might be a little bit more out on. I think first and foremost they would want to move Castillo first, but I could see them moving a George Kirby caliber starting pitcher, a guy that can just give the Mets really good quality innings. That guy throws innings. It's 200 plus nearly every season when he's healthy. Obviously this year he didn't start the season and he got hurt. He got banged up a little bit, but this is a guy I think the Mets really should be looking to target. And I think Jeff McNeil really fits. Obviously, they just did acquire Eugenio Suarez, as well as, I am blanking on the last guy that they acquired at the trade deadline. They did acquire two bats, but Suarez is going to be a free agent, and he hasn't necessarily worked out too well over there. I think they could play Jeff. I think they could play Jeff all over the diamond there, and I think he would be a good bat for that Seattle Mariners team. And then, I guess moving on just a little bit, I'm going to wrap this up quite shortly, but I think the Mets need to figure out what they need to do with the baby Mets, and I guess now the teenage Mets. And I don't, and I guess I have to qualify, or I guess I kind of have to qualify for myself here. I don't include Francisco Alvarez with these guys anymore, just because I think Alvarez has given us enough of an MLB sample size. He just needs to stay healthy, but I think that when this guy, I think he has the talent of an all-star caliber level catcher. I think he gives you at worst average to above average defense. We'll see how the ABS system affects his framing. I think it might impact him a little bit negatively, but I think at worst this guy is an average catcher behind the dish with plus power. Obviously is well over 30 home run bat from the catcher position. We just need to see him stay consistently healthy. But I think when you're talking about guys like Brett Beatty, Ronnie Mauricio, Mark Vientos, and I'll throw Luis Angel Acuna in there, the Mets need to figure out who those guys are and if they're a part of the solution long term with this team. I mean, and I know I had done a recording earlier where I was really praising Brett Beatty because I am really proud of the steps that he's made. Not only obviously defensively, he's going to be a 3-win player this year, but that play yesterday, getting picked off of second base, and it happened in the Philly series as well, where he got picked off of first base. Those can't happen. Those are losing plays for this ball club in a team that desperately needs to get wins here. The Mets are still in a playoff spot, half a game up, but those are losing plays, and it just seems like there's too many of those losing plays, not just coming from Brett Beatty, but from all these guys that just can't quite seem to get it done. And I think the Mets really need to figure out what those guys are and if they're a long part of this team's future, either in a bench role or in a quasi-starting role. I'm not saying necessarily to trade Brett Beatty. I think the third base position in MLB, although it is star-studded, doesn't really appear that there's many avenues to make a trade and to go acquire a third baseman as an upgrade for Brett Beatty. And I think what you have here now with him is a very good defender and roughly around like a 105 to 110 WRC plus bat. Hopefully that gets a little bit better, but that's such a drastic improvement from what we saw from him when he first got in, and obviously the years leading up to this year. But in terms of, I think the Mets will explore looking for trades just to even get more starting pitching with this team. And I'm going to get into the starting pitchers in the next episode just because there's so much to talk about there. Because I think there's so many things that they can do. They do have a lot of internal options because a lot of people obviously are screaming for more starting pitching, myself included, as well as the bullpen, which I will also get into in the next episode. But I think that the Mets might not be doing a whole lot there outside of a couple of trades, but I don't think they're really going to sign anybody too crazy. But as I said, I'll break down all of that in the next episode. But in conclusion, I do think the Mets really need to make a concerted effort to bring back Pete Alonso. I think they will bring him back. As I said, I just don't know where that production is coming from if you're not going to keep him. Edwin Diaz, I would put on a tier below. I really want them to at least make a competitive offer, but I understand not allocating all of those financial resources to just one closer who only will pitch at the most 65 innings, 70 innings a year. So I understand it, even though locking down that ninth inning is so critically important. And then last but not least, I do think a Jeff McNeil trade should happen. And it's not just to make a trade for trade's sake. I think if there's an offer out there that makes sense to go improve in other areas, and if you feel confident about your Carson Benges and your Jet Williams, mostly Jet Williams for Jeff McNeil, I do think that is a route that the Mets should be exploring to take. So thank you very much for listening to the first episode of One on Mets. We will see you very soon discussing the starting pitching and I guess that kind of core group of guys because there's a lot to go into there. Thank you.